Margaret Sanger's legacy, shrouded in controversy, has come under renewed scrutiny with the release of the 1916 Project, a movie that sheds light on the grim history of Planned Parenthood's founder. Once dismissed as a conspiracy theory, allegations about Sanger's intentions to eradicate Black Americans through her reproductive health initiatives are now more widely accepted as documented truth. The film unmasks her insidious ideology, revealing her as a figure whose name should be synonymous with racial oppression, eugenics, and a calculated agenda to manipulate prominent Black leaders. Let's break down the facts and explore the inconvenient truth behind Margaret Sanger's disturbing mission. The uncomfortable truth about Margaret Sanger is that her vision for Planned Parenthood went far beyond women's rights or birth control. Her agenda was about controlling populations she deemed unfit or undesirable. The movie details how Sanger, an advocate of eugenics, sought to rid society of what she considered human weeds, a category into which she placed Black people and those with disabilities. Her drive to purify society led her to establish clinics in predominantly Black communities, aiming to reduce the birth rate among African Americans. As the 1916 Project makes clear, her objectives were not limited to the United States. She harbored ambitions for global population control. One of the most damning revelations in the movie is Sanger's strategic use of Black leaders to gain legitimacy in the African American community. She reached out to figures like W.E.B. Du Bois and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose stature within the community made them prime candidates for endorsements. The film reveals that Sanger's manipulation was cloaked in language about improving public health and family planning, but in reality, it was a calculated attempt to neutralize what she saw as a demographic threat. It's no coincidence that many Planned Parenthood clinics were and still are located near Black and low-income neighborhoods. It's one thing to learn about Margaret Sanger's dark past, but it's another to see modern-day figures like Hillary Clinton openly praising her. In the 1916 Project, Clinton's accolades for Sanger are highlighted, showing how she spoke glowingly about the Planned Parenthood founder, even accepting the organization's Margaret Sanger Award in 2009. While Clinton never explicitly endorsed Sanger's eugenics ideology, the film raises the question: how can one praise someone so vehemently without recognizing the sinister roots of their work? Sanger's mission wasn't a secret to those who took the time to understand it. It was hiding in plain sight for anyone who cared to look. Clinton's enthusiasm for Sanger seems either naive or complicit, depending on how deep one believes her knowledge of Sanger's work went. The irony of Manhattan's now defunct Margaret Sanger Square Planned Parenthood location is not lost on anyone aware of the controversy. For years, the street and the clinic bore Sanger's name until recent pressure from activists and revelations about her destructive ideology led to the removal of her name. her legacy stain was simply too dark to ignore. The fact that her name was attached to a facility in a majority-minority city speaks volumes about how the narrative of reproductive health was sold to communities that were often left in the dark about Sanger's true intentions. The movie also takes aim at Black religious leaders who have historically refrained from challenging Planned Parenthood's narrative. The 1916 project shows how some churches were effectively used as vehicles to promote Sanger's vision without ever addressing its true nature. Black pastors were sometimes brought on board to lend credibility to the notion of family planning in the Black community, unknowingly supporting an agenda that sought to diminish their very congregation's numbers. However, the film doesn't shy away from recognizing contemporary voices who challenge the narrative. One of the movie's key moments is when it shows John and members of his rally church standing outside abortion clinics, not just to protest, but to pray and stand for life. These happy warriors have saved countless lives and debunked the stereotype that Black churches are merely mouthpieces for the Democratic Party's policies. They are instead vocal advocates for life, revealing how Sanger's vision continues to unravel within communities that are waking up to her deceptive legacy. The numbers don't lie. Decades of Planned Parenthood's presence in Black neighborhoods have coincided with a disproportionate number of abortions within the African American community. Today, over 70% of Planned Parenthood's facilities are located within walking distance of minority communities. Some might argue that this reflects a commitment to serve those who need affordable health care. But let's be honest, the organization's founder had a different goal in mind: reducing the population of what she considered to be unfit groups. The 1916 project does an effective job of laying out the math and connecting the dots for anyone willing to see the bigger picture. The devastating impact of abortion on the Black community is not merely a coincidence. It's the fruition of a century-old plan. Even now, Margaret Sanger's vision continues to wreak havoc under the guise of women's rights and choice. Margaret Sanger's intentions are no longer up for debate. She was not a champion for women's rights. She was a eugenicist with a plan, and that plan was endorsed knowingly or unknowingly by figures like Hillary Clinton, who openly praised her without addressing the dark undercurrents of her work. Black preachers, community leaders, and advocates have a responsibility to educate their congregations and communities about the true history of Planned Parenthood. It is time to reclaim the narrative and address the very real consequences that Sanger's legacy continues to impose on African American families. As the 1916 project teaches us, the fight for truth is far from over. The first step is recognizing the lies that have been sold to us for generations, disguised as compassion and health care. Margaret Sanger didn't see Black Americans as people deserving of life and dignity. She saw them as a problem to be eradicated. It's time we see her for who she really was and take back the control over our community's future. The chilling revelations about Margaret Sanger's vision for Planned Parenthood should serve as a wake-up call, not just a history lesson. Sanger's eugenics-driven agenda to control black populations under the guise of health care has left a lasting legacy, but the tactics have evolved with the times. Today, we find ourselves in a new era where health initiatives, technological advancements, and philanthropic projects continue to target vulnerable communities, all under the facade of benevolence and progress. It is crucial for us to recognize these modern threats which, like Sanger's agenda, masquerade as beneficial but carry the potential for catastrophic harm. As we peel back the layers of these so-called solutions, it becomes apparent that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Figures like Bill Gates have stepped into Sanger's shoes, pushing agendas that appear friendly on the surface, but reveal troubling implications when we dig deeper. Bill Gates, often regarded as a visionary and philanthropist, exerts a powerful influence over global health and agricultural policies despite having no formal education or qualifications in medicine or public health. His ventures into vaccinations, GMOs, and synthetic meats raise red flags for many who question why a billionaire with no medical background is steering the direction of worldwide health initiatives. Gates' heavy involvement in the development of that C-19, may I say, right? You got to be careful how you say it online now, as well as his ongoing efforts to introduce genetically modified foods and lab-grown meat into the food supply, echoes Sanger's manipulation of public health narratives to push a different kind of population control. Just as Sanger's targeted black communities under the guise of reproductive health, Gates' initiatives are disproportionately focused on African populations and other marginalized groups, raising suspicions about his true motivations. Gates' extensive activities in Africa, from promoting vaccination campaigns advocating for GMO farming, have drawn significant criticism from many who view his efforts as a continuation of colonialist policies disguised as philanthropy. Under the pretense of helping to feed the world and eradicate diseases, his ventures often prioritize profit-driven solutions that benefit biotech companies rather than sustainable, locally driven agricultural practices or culturally sensitive health care. Like Sanger, who used prominent black figures to lend credibility to her initiatives, Gates collaborates with local governments and international organizations to legitimize his ventures. However, when scrutinized closely, his projects often lead to dependency on foreign aid, loss of food sovereignty, and the suppression of indigenous farming techniques. Essentially, modern-day forms of control that weaken rather than empower. The parallels between Sanger and Gates are striking, especially in their exploitation of health crisis to push controversial agendas. During the pandemic, and I gotta be careful how I say it, Gates was a leading voice promoting mass intake of these substances, I'll say it that way, despite growing concerns about adverse effects and lack of long-term safety data. The fact that the substance rollout targeted populations who were historically subjected to medical exploitation, such as black and indigenous communities, raised serious ethical questions. Gates' advocacy for a global vaccination strategy was presented as an altruistic effort to save lives. But for many, it bore an uncomfortable resemblance to Sanger's justification for birth control and sterilization. In both cases, the real-world consequences disproportionately affected those who are already most vulnerable, perpetuating a cycle of harm, masked by the language of compassion. It is not only Gates who embodies this new wave of modern-day eugenicists. There are other influential figures and entities pushing similar agendas, from tech moguls promoting AI and genetic engineering to pharmaceutical giants profiting from drugs with dubious safety records. These actors operate with a framework that favors corporate interests and social engineering over true human well-being. In this environment, Black communities must be vigilant and question who truly benefits from these advancements that are so often framed as revolutionary steps toward a better future. The lessons learned from the dark history of Planned Parenthood must be applied to scrutinize contemporary initiatives that claim to uplift us while systematically undermining our autonomy, health, and cultural heritage. The fight against modern-day eugenics is not just a matter of resisting harmful practices or questionable initiatives. It is about reclaiming our right to self-determination. We must recognize when help is being weaponized against us and stay informed about who is steering the course of public health and policy. Margaret Sanger's mission didn't end with her. It has merely transformed and found new champions in people like Bill Gates. The struggle for survival continues, and we must be just as strategic and unyielding in our resistance as Sanger was in her pursuit of control. Our future depends on our ability to see through the smoke and mirrors and advocate fiercely for the preservation and empowerment of our communities. Thank you so much for listening. This is Lancescurv. Always visit Lancescurv.com for the work that we do not show on various platforms like this. Have a wonderful evening. Peace.
Lancescurv.com. Bold, raw, and uncut.